My name is Callie Morrow. I'm 29 years old, and I learned the shape of my family in a hospital waiting room when my grandfather was dying 40 feet away, and nobody told me until the third day. They took turns keeping me out, my aunt at the door on Monday, my mother on Tuesday with an excuse so thin I could see straight through it, my uncle by Wednesday, arms crossed, telling me visiting hours were difficult. One hallway, one room, one old man I'd spoken to every week for 22 years, and a rotation of people making sure I wasn't in it. What I didn't know, what none of them had thought to tell me, was that 3 months before the hospital, my grandfather had sat down with his attorney and rewritten his will, and that he had left a voice message on his phone the morning they admitted him. A message addressed to me by name, 11 minutes long. I didn't find that phone until the fourth day, and when I hit play, I had to sit down on the floor right there in the middle of his kitchen because my legs simply stopped working. Welcome back to Truth Seekers, the channel where quiet people stop being quiet at exactly the right moment. If someone in your life has ever managed your access to something that was yours, your time, your truth, your own name in someone else's sentence, this story is going to land somewhere specific. Drop a comment. Tell me what kept you out of a room you deserve to be in. And subscribe, because the part of this story where everything reverses is the part I want you to watch all the way through. Let me tell you who my grandfather was before I tell you what they did, because you need to know what they were protecting themselves from. His name was Frank Morrow. 78 years old, retired mechanical engineer. A man who kept a legal pad in his breast pocket at all times and filled one every 6 days. His handwriting was small and unhurried. He drew diagrams in the margins of newspapers. He could tell you the tensile strength of structural steel off the top of his head, and he would if you made the mistake of asking anything adjacent to it. He smelled like machine oil and cedar and the particular brand of coffee he'd been ordering from the same catalog supplier for 30 years. He was also the person who raised me functionally. My mother, his daughter, was present in the architectural sense. She lived in the house. She cooked on Sundays, she drove to school plays. But she was a woman who had grown up watching her own father succeed in ways she had not, and she had developed a complicated reaction to competence that I didn't have language for until I was much older. The reaction looked like warmth when other people were watching. It felt like something else when it was just the two of us and there was nothing to perform for. My grandfather was different. He asked what I thought. He waited for the answer. Not the polite nodding kind of waiting that adults give children to signal they fulfilled their obligation and would like to move on. He actually waited. When I was 12 and told him I wanted to build things, bridges, specifically, I'd seen a documentary about suspension design. He didn't redirect me towards something more reasonable. He took me to the library on a Saturday, and we checked out 7 books, and he read 2 of them himself, and then called me on Sunday to tell me he disagreed with the author's position on tension cables. When I was 17 and applied to the engineering program that was 2 states away, he drove me to the campus visit without being asked. My mother called it running away from the family. He called it good planning and excellent judgment, and possibly the best decision I would ever make. I got in. I went. And for 4 years, Frank Morrow was the person I called on Sunday evenings every week without missing one. From a payphone in the dorm lobby freshman year, to a cell phone in my first apartment when I graduated. He asked about my coursework. He argued with my professor's methodology through me as a proxy, which meant I often arrived at class on Mondays with counterarguments that I barely understood but had been carefully coached in. He told me once when I was deep in a project I couldn't solve that the only engineers who quit are the ones who forgot why they started. I keep that somewhere I can find it on bad days. The family that kept me out of his hospital room, they were his family too, technically. My Aunt Patricia, his other daughter, my Uncle Dennis, who had married into the Morrow name and made himself indispensable to it over 30 years, in a way that had more to do with positioning than affection. My cousin Brent, Patricia's son, 33, who managed the rental properties my grandfather had quietly accumulated, and who had been managing them the way a man manages something he's already decided belongs to him but hasn't quite worked out the paperwork for. And my mother, Sandra Morrow, 55, who had spent her adult life in a kind of low-grade competitive grief about the fact that her father had found it easier to love me than to be proud of her. She never said that out loud. She didn't have to. It came through in 100 other sentences, in 100 small redirections and pointed silences, and the particular way she introduced me to people, always in relation to something she found lacking, always with a footnote attached. The four of them operated as a unit when it mattered. And it had been a long time since anything had mattered the way my grandfather's deteriorating health suddenly mattered. He'd had the first cardiac event in January, small but serious, caught early. He recovered quickly enough that by March he was back to filling his legal pads and arguing with me about load distribution over the phone. I flew out for a week in April, and we sat on his porch every morning with coffee, and he showed me the diagrams he'd been drawing. Plans for a small footbridge across the creek at the back of his property. He said he wanted to build it himself. And his cardiologist had said no, and he was ignoring that advice with the deliberate commitment of a man who knows exactly what he's choosing and considers the quality of the time worth more than the quantity of it. The second incident happened in late August. This one was not small. His neighbor found him on the kitchen floor and called an ambulance, and by the time anyone called me, he had been admitted for 18 hours. I heard it from my cousin Brent, not from my mother, and Brent phrased it the way you phrase a thing when you want the other person to feel like an afterthought. "Oh, you didn't know? He's been there since yesterday. Sorry, we all thought someone had called you. I booked a flight within the hour. I told my mother I was coming. She said that was probably unnecessary, and that the doctors were optimistic and that family was already there, and it would be crowded and emotionally taxing for everyone." Which was a sentence that did a lot of invisible work if you knew how to read it. Family was already there. Meaning, she had organized a perimeter, and I was outside it. I want to be precise about what happened over the next 3 days, because the precision is the whole point. This wasn't a misunderstanding about visiting hours. This wasn't a communication breakdown between busy people who all meant well, but got confused. This was a coordinated effort to keep me from being in that room, while decisions were being made, and while my grandfather was still conscious and capable of making them. Monday. I arrive at the hospital, and my Aunt Patricia meets me in the lobby. Her face is arranged for concern, which is her most reliable tool. She tells me he's resting, the doctors don't want him overstimulated, the family is taking shifts, and it's all very organized, and they have a system. She steers me toward a seating area with her hand on my shoulder blade, the way you herd something that doesn't yet know it's being herded. I notice the hand. I sit down anyway. She stays with me for 40 minutes. She tells me stories about his recent months that I already know from my own phone calls. She monitors the clock without appearing to. When I say I'd like to go up, she says perhaps tomorrow would be better. He needs his rest tonight. The nurses have been very clear about limiting stimulation. I go to my grandfather's house to sleep. It's 20 minutes from the hospital. He gave me a key years ago when I started visiting regularly. The house is empty, but it smells like him, and I sit in his chair in the study for a long time in the dark. And I tell myself, tomorrow will be different. Tuesday. I drive to the hospital. My mother is in the lobby this time. She intercepts me with what I will later understand was a script that had been prepared in advance, probably the night before. She has a list of reasons. The cardiologist came early. There are new protocols. He slept poorly. He's been asking for quiet. There's something with his oxygen levels. The nursing staff mentioned they're concerned about his blood pressure rising with too many visitors. She speaks quickly and without leaving pauses, because a pause is a seam, and a seam is an opening. And she knows from 30 years of practice that I will find any opening available if she leaves one. She asks if I've eaten. She offers to take me to lunch. We go and I watch her fill the space with things that have nothing to do with what is happening. Brent's most recent property acquisition, Patricia's kitchen renovation, the weather in August, the small talk of a woman using small talk as insulation. She does not ask about my work. She does not ask about my life. She performs the role of attentive mother in a way that is technically complete and entirely hollow. I tell her I need to see him today. She says she'll check with the nurses and let me know. She does not let me know. Wednesday. I arrive before regular visiting hours. I have done research. My uncle Dennis is in the lobby. I did not expect Dennis. Dennis is 6'2", a former college football player turned commercial real estate attorney, and he fills a doorway the way only certain men do. Men who learned early that presence could substitute for argument. He tells me my grandfather had a rough night. He tells me the family has been asked to limit visitors. He tells me I should take another day. I look at Dennis for a long moment. He looks back at me with the particular expression of a man executing an assignment he considers beneath him, but performing it anyway, because the stakes are high enough to make even small indignities worthwhile. I ask him what the stakes are, not as a real question, as a sentence that lands where he can't pretend it didn't. He says something about not wanting to upset Frank in a delicate condition. Then he turns and walks back toward the elevator, with the practiced ease of a man who has ended many conversations by simply deciding they were over 3 days, 3 different people, 1 rotating door, 1 hallway, 1 room. I want to stop here for a second because if you're still watching, you already understand something. I was only beginning to piece together on the 3rd day, sitting in my grandfather's study. When a family locks you out of a room, they're almost never locking you out of a room. The room is a proxy. What they are actually locking you out of is information. They are controlling which version of reality you receive, and when, and from whom, and what questions you ask, because you don't yet know what you don't know. The room with the old man in the bed is only significant because of what it contains that they don't want you to touch before they've finished arranging it. I want to be honest about what those 3 days felt like from the inside, because people always want to know, and the honest answer is that it didn't feel like anger right away. Anger came later. What those 3 days felt like was a specific and disorienting vertigo that comes from being gaslit by people who are performing love while practicing its opposite. Each of them was warm enough when they intercepted me. Each of them spoke in the language of concern, the vocabulary of people who have someone's best interests at heart. And I had 29 years of being in this family, 29 years of absorbing its rhythms and believing its performances. So the part of me that knew something was wrong was fighting against the part of me that wanted to believe the version they were offering. That is the particular genius of a coordinated manipulation inside a family. It doesn't require anyone to be visibly cruel. It only requires everyone involved to agree on a story and deliver it with enough warmth that the target keeps reaching for the charitable interpretation. Keep the peace. Assume good faith. Give them the benefit of the doubt. These are things families teach you to do. And they are genuinely good instincts in ordinary situations, and they are exactly the instincts that get weaponized when the situation stops being ordinary. By Wednesday evening, I had run out of charitable interpretations. 3 people, 1 per day, each with a different face and a different specific reason, all pointing me toward the same chair in the same lobby and away from the same room. The geometry was too consistent. Good intentions don't have geometry. Geometry requires coordination. I sat in my grandfather's study on Wednesday night in the dark, with his legal pad on my knee and one of his pencils in my hand. And I wrote down what I knew. Not what I suspected, what I could actually document: his name, the 7 properties, the transfer date, the attorney's name, the phone call 3 months ago where he had said the right things for the right person, and then changed the subject. The way the reply to Eleanor Stead on day 3 had not sounded like him. I looked at that list for a long time, and then I did what he had spent 22 years teaching me to do when a structure doesn't make sense. I didn't argue with what I was seeing. I found the question underneath it. What is this actually holding up? Stay with me, because the part where I stop being managed and start reading the actual numbers is right here, and it turns faster than you expect. Stay with me, because the part where I stop being managed and start reading the actual load-bearing structure of what my grandfather left behind, that is right here, and it turns faster than you expect. I didn't sleep on the second night. I built a nap instead. I am a structural engineer. I do not spiral. When I don't understand the terrain, I find a higher vantage point. I inventory what I know, identify what's missing, and locate the most efficient path to the information I need. That is not a personality trait. That is a discipline. My grandfather installed it in me over 22 years of Sunday phone calls and Saturday library trips, and the specific way he looked at me when I reached for the easy answer instead of the right one. What I knew: my grandfather owned this house. He had a portfolio of rental properties. He had an investment account he'd mentioned once in passing years ago. He had an attorney named Eleanor Stead, whose office was downtown. What I knew from 3 months ago: he had called me on a Thursday evening and said, "Callie, I want to make sure some things are properly arranged." I had asked what things. He had said the right things for the right person. Then he'd changed the subject to the footbridge and the creek, and the cardiologist's increasingly frustrated advisories. I had let him change it. I had not followed the thread. I was following it now. What I found on the County Public Records website, after 40 minutes and 3 separate search queries and a database that loaded as though it was thinking very carefully about each piece of information before releasing it. 7 properties in Frank Morrow's name. Current, active, generating rental income. And 1 transfer date 42 days prior, next to the most valuable address on the list. The commercial strip on the north side that was pulling in $84,000 annually, transferred to Dennis and Patricia Hollister, my aunt and uncle, 6 weeks before the second cardiac event. Before the hospital, before the lobby. A transfer can mean many things. I knew that. Estate planning. A gift. A man who sees his health declining and makes sensible arrangements. Or it can be something else. I didn't have enough yet to call it by the right name. But I had enough to understand that the room they had been keeping me out of was not simply a medical room. It was the room where the final chapter of my grandfather's decisions was visible. And every person guarding the door had a direct financial stake in which chapter I read, and when I folded that information into the precise pocket in my mind where I keep things that aren't ready to be used yet, but must not be lost. And I waited for morning. On the fourth day, I did not go to the hospital. I went to my grandfather's house. This requires a small explanation about Frank Morrow that matters a great deal to everything that follows. He was a man of tremendous habit and very little sentimentality about objects. He did not keep boxes of photographs in the attic. He did not accumulate things that reminded him of things. He traveled light in every sense of the word. His possessions could be described on a single page, and what filled the rest of the house was not accumulation, but intention. Every item was there because he had decided it should be there. He carried his phone everywhere, and he never put it down carelessly. It was a model from 4 years ago, outdated when he bought it, and he had refused to upgrade it because it did 3 things he needed. He could call people. He could photograph his hand-drawn diagrams and send them to me with notes scrawled in the margin. And he could record voice memos, which he used the way other people use journals to capture a thought before it left him, to work out a problem in real time, to say something that was easier in voice than in text. I had received approximately 300 of those voice memos over 4 years. Load calculations he wanted me to sanity check. Questions about my current projects. Long, winding observations about a book he'd been reading that had reminded him of something I had said in 2019. I had kept all of them. I have a folder on my phone labeled Frank, and I open it sometimes on hard days the way other people open old photographs. His phone was on the small table beside his chair in the study, charging on the same cable that had always been there, curled the same way it always curled. It was there because it was always there when he was home. It was there because the people rotating through his hospital room had either not thought to bring it or had thought about it and made a different decision. I sat in his chair. I picked up the phone. The screen asked for a passcode I knew because he had given it to me 2 years earlier when he needed me to pull a number remotely. His birthday in the format, he always wrote dates, day first, then month, then year. 6 digits. The screen opened. 47 unread messages. A thread with Eleanor Stead containing a message she had sent on the day he was admitted, and a reply, 3 days later, sent from this phone, that did not read like a 78-year-old man. Brief, formal, slightly off in tone in a way I felt before I could explain it. I set that observation down carefully and moved on. I opened the voice memos. The most recent one had been recorded at 6:41 in the morning on the day of admission. The timestamp was 4 hours before his neighbor found him on the kitchen floor. He had been in this house, in this chair, in the early morning quiet, and he had pressed record. The file was 11 minutes and 23 seconds long. I want you to understand what it means to hear a person's voice when you have been afraid for 4 days that you might not reach them in time. It is not a clean experience. There is nothing smooth about it. It is like standing in front of a door you were told was locked and discovering it has been open since before you arrived, and the only thing that kept you from it was the people standing in front of it with their arms out. His voice was clear, deliberately paced. the voice he used when he was working through something he had prepared carefully and wanted to get right. He said my name first. He said, "Callie, if you're hearing this, either I gave it to you myself, which would mean everything worked out fine and I'm just being thorough, or you found the phone, which means things went the way I've been quietly planning for, and you're going to need what I'm about to tell you." Then a pause. The pause of a man who has rehearsed the sentence many times and is now saying it once out loud, for real. He talked for 11 minutes. He told me he had been observing for several months the way certain members of his family had been positioning themselves around his assets. He used the word positioning exactly, which was a Frank Morrow word, the word of a man who had spent a career understanding where things were in relation to what they were meant to support. He said he had watched it, the way you watch a load shift in a structure, incrementally, with the specific dread of someone who was not surprised but had hoped to be wrong. He told me about the property transfer. He said he had signed documents his attorney had flagged as requiring careful review, and that he had reviewed them, but that he was not certain the version that had come back for his signature was the version she had prepared. He said he had told Eleanor Stead. He said she had advised him to record his intentions in as many documented formats as possible, which is why he was speaking into this phone at 6:41 in the morning. He said the bulk of his estate, the remaining properties, the investment account, the house, and everything in it, was to go to me. Not divided, not conditional, named, direct, with written reasoning filed with Eleanor 3 weeks prior. He told me about my mother. He said he had tried to talk to her. He said she had cried, the way she cried when the world failed to arrange itself around her expectations. He said he felt for her, genuinely, in the way you feel for someone who has confused your love for a ledger they can collect from. He said he hoped I would be kind to her. He had left her a fund that would keep her comfortable because she was his daughter and he was not punishing her. He was only arranging truth. Then he said, the part that put me on the floor. He said he had recorded this message because he knew, not suspected, knew, that when he went into the hospital, certain people would work to limit my access. He said he had watched the preparations being made. He said he was sorry he had not warned me sooner, that he had believed until the last few weeks that they would choose better than this. He said, "Callie, don't stay angry in a way that costs you your peace. Be angry enough to do what needs to be done. Then let it go. Call Eleanor. She has everything. She's been waiting for you to reach out." He said he loved me. In the plain, unadorned way that people say it when they mean it completely and have nothing to prove by saying it. The recording ended. I sat on the floor of his study. I don't know exactly how long. Long enough for the morning light through the east window to change angle. Long enough for the silence of the house to stop feeling like absence and start feeling like presence. Then I called Eleanor Stead. She answered on the second ring. When I said my name, she was quiet. For exactly 1 second. The silence of a woman who had been waiting for a call that was overdue and was relieved it had finally come. She said, "I'm very glad you found the phone." She confirmed everything. The will was current, filed, unambiguous. The signed statement of intent was dated 3 weeks prior, and specifically, by name, addressed the possibility of family pressure being applied to alter the outcome. The property transfer was under active review because my grandfather had contacted her afterward and said the document placed in front of him had not matched the version she had prepared, and she had already taken preservation steps with the county recorder's office. She was 2 weeks into building a record. She had been waiting for a family member with legal standing to bring the concern forward formally. I was that person. I was the beneficiary of record. I went to her office that afternoon. I sat across a desk that had absorbed 1,000 difficult conversations, and I let Eleanor Stead walk me through the architecture of what my grandfather had built. The investment account, just under $2 million, 7 properties, current market value, approximately $1.4 million. The house, $380,000. Total estate, before expenses, just over $3.7 million. The transferred property was the single most valuable of the 7, a commercial strip in a growing area generating $84,000 per year, executed on paperwork that Eleanor had not prepared and that referenced a signature she had reason to believe had been obtained under false context. I asked her to tell me what false context meant in this specific situation. She said it meant that, in her professional opinion, based on her review of the documentation and her knowledge of her client, the document presented to my grandfather for signature had been described to him as something other than what it was. I asked her what happens now. She told me the legal preservation was already underway. She told me I had standing. She told me the path was clear if I wanted to walk it. I told her I would walk it. Then I drove to the hospital. Not to the lobby. Up to the floor, past the elevator, down the hall to the room number I had been given, and redirected away from for 4 days. My Aunt Patricia was in the chair outside the door. She stood when she saw me coming. I watched her face cycle through available responses, which door to open, which version of herself to present. I said, "I've spoken with Eleanor Stead. I know about the will. I know about the property transfer, and I'm going in to see my grandfather now." She did not move for 1 second. Then 2. The particular stillness of a machine whose operator has stopped running it. Then she stepped aside. Frank Morrow was awake. He looked smaller than the last time I'd seen him, and he also looked exactly like himself. Which is a thing that only happens with people you've known long enough, that their essential quality is more real to you than their physical condition. His eyes found me before I reached the bed, and something in his face shifted. A window opened. A pressure released. He said my name. Just my name. The same way the recording had started. I sat in the chair beside his bed and took his hand, and we didn't talk much for a while. Some things don't need language. Some things are just 2 people finally in the room. They should have been in 4 days earlier, sitting together in the fact of it. After a while, he squeezed my hand and asked if I had found the phone. I told him I had. He nodded, slowly, with the specific satisfaction of a man whose plan had executed as designed. "I found all of it," I told him. "Eleanor too." "Good," he said. "That's good, Callie." He slept. I stayed. Patricia came in once and stood at the foot of the bed and looked at her father and then at me, and her face held an expression I couldn't quite name, somewhere between shame and defiance and the specific panic of someone watching a story they controlled walk out from under them. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. Some silences carry more than anything either person could have put in them. The property transfer was unwound in the months that followed. Eleanor's documentation, the county review, and the elder financial exploitation specialist's assessment made the legal picture clear. Dennis and Patricia's attorney proposed several versions of a negotiated outcome, which in practice meant several versions of them, keeping a portion of what they had taken. Eleanor's response was consistent. There was no version of that story available. The transfer was reversed. I want to tell you what Dennis said to me once when we crossed paths at the house in October, not because it was remarkable, because it was so perfectly ordinary in its wrongness that it tells you everything about how people like Dennis operate. He said he had only been trying to protect the family. He said it calmly, without visible shame. The way a man says something he has decided is true. Because accepting the alternative would require him to look at himself directly. He said it the way you say things. When you've been managing a situation so long that you've lost the thread between the management and the meaning. I told him that protecting the family had not involved me. He said I had always been difficult to reach, which was a fascinating reinterpretation of 3 days of lobby intercepts. I told him I didn't think we needed to have more conversation than that, and I walked inside. There's a thing that happens when a coordinated deception falls apart in front of the people who coordinated it. You expect something more dramatic than what you get. You expect confrontation, or remorse, or at least the recognition that something significant has occurred. What you usually get instead is a pivot. They don't process what they did. They process how to reframe it. Dennis reframed it as protection. Patricia, when I ran into her at the hospital, the week my grandfather came home, reframed it as concern for everyone's well-being, including mine. My mother reframed it as fear, which was at least the most honest version of any of the reframings, even if it was still a frame. That is the thing I had to sit with. The people who did this did not transform overnight into people capable of honest accounting. They adjusted their story to the new facts and continued on. And I had to decide what to do with that, not for their sake, for mine. My grandfather's instruction had been specific. Be angry enough to do what needs to be done. Then let it go. He had not said forgive. He had said let it go, which are different things. Forgiveness is something you give another person. Letting go is something you do for yourself. You can let a thing go without pretending it was smaller than it was, without requiring the people who did it to acknowledge the size of it, without waiting for a remorse that is never going to arrive in the form you'd recognize. I let it go in the sense that I stopped carrying it as the central weight of my days. I did not let it go in the sense of pretending it hadn't happened. Those are also different things. Both distinctions, my grandfather would have noted, are structural. They determine what you can build on top of them. My cousin Brent's situation became its own separate matter when Eleanor's review of the property management accounts revealed a discrepancy between what he had been reporting to my grandfather and what the actual figures were. That discrepancy was not small. Brent no longer manages anything. My mother came to me 2 weeks after my grandfather came home from the hospital. She sat in his kitchen in the same chair she'd sat in her entire childhood, and she looked around the room like a woman counting things she might not have access to anymore. She said she hadn't known about the transfer. I believe the technical version of that. I also believe she understood what was happening in the lobby, and chose not to examine it closely because the outcome Dennis and Patricia were protecting was an outcome that would have benefited her version of events too. I told her that plainly. Not as an attack, as a factual description of a low distribution she had made a choice about. She cried. Real tears, the kind that cost something and still don't change what happened. I let her cry. Then I told her that her father had left her something meaningful, that she was taken care of, that I had no interest in erasing her from his life for whatever time he had left. But I also told her that the lobby had happened, that the rotating door had happened, that I knew about the group text she had sent Patricia on the second morning asking if they had given me any openings, and that Patricia had replied 2 words meaning no. That I was naming it not to punish her, but because unnamed things stay in the walls of a relationship like water damage, invisible and spreading, and I was done living in a house I couldn't inspect. She didn't apologize. She said she had been afraid. She said she had made choices she knew were not right, and had made them anyway, because fear sometimes overrides what you know. I understood that. I understood her, actually, in the way my grandfather had asked me to understand her, not as an excuse but as a shape. She was a woman who had watched her father love someone else more easily than he loved her, and she had never forgiven herself for not being easier to love. That was old. That was not mine to fix, but it was hers to own. I told her she could be in my life, that I chose not to cut her out, not because she had earned it, but because my grandfather had asked me to be kind, and because being kind to a complicated person is not the same as allowing them to operate without accountability. She nodded. She didn't know what to do with that yet. Neither of us did. Frank came home in September. We built the footbridge. He drew the plans, precise, annotated, with load calculations in the margin, and I built it. Saturday mornings through October, him in his folding chair on the creek bank, with his legal pad, me in the water with boots and hardware, and the particular quiet satisfaction that comes from building something that will hold actual weight. We didn't talk much while we worked. We didn't need to. The work was the conversation. He died in January. Peacefully. In his chair in the study early morning, a legal pad on his lap. There was a diagram on the top page, half finished. I have not moved it. It is in the drawer of the desk I use now. When I work at his house, which is my house, which he arranged to be my house 3 months before he needed to go into the hospital, and which was waiting for me in exactly the condition he left it. The voice memo is still on his phone. I haven't deleted it. I play it sometimes, not often, only when I need to be reminded of the specific engineering my grandfather applied to the problem of loving someone well in conditions that were not ideal. He had no guarantee I would find the phone. He had no guarantee the plan would work. But he had been watching me for 22 years, and he knew how I moved through a problem. He knew I would eventually stop going to the lobby and start going to the house. He knew I would sit in his chair. He knew the phone would be on the table. He had installed the passcode in my memory 2 years before he needed me to use it. He solved for his own absence the way a good engineer solves for the worst likely condition. Quietly in advance, without announcing what he was doing, accounting for the load of people who would try to stand between the structure and the person it was built for. 11 minutes and 23 seconds. That was what he had when he still had time to use it. He spent none of it on anger. He spent all of it on clarity and love and the exact information I would need to do what needed to be done. Here is what I want to leave you with. Not the legal resolution, though that matters. Not the numbers, though those were real and I am not softening them. What I want to leave you with is the load-bearing principle underneath everything else. If you are the person in your family who gets managed instead of consulted, who receives information on a schedule that someone else designed, who finds herself outside a lobby while a rotation of people take shifts explaining why the timing isn't right. The problem is almost never the thing they're describing to you. It is the thing beneath the thing they need you not to see. The room is never just a room. My grandfather taught me to ask one question about any structure I was assessing. He taught it to me at a drafting table when I was 12 years old, with a pencil and engineering paper, and the patience of a man who already knew the answer and wanted me to find it myself. What is this actually holding up? Not what it looks like it's holding up. Not what the people who built it say it's holding up. What it is actually holding up. Follow that question wherever it leads. That is the column you need to know about. That is the load-bearing truth. The people keeping me out of that room believed the room was what mattered. They believed that if they controlled access to my grandfather, they controlled the outcome. What they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand, was that the person I was trying to reach had anticipated all of it. He had walked through every failure point. He had built around the obstruction before the obstruction existed. He had left a door that wasn't in the lobby and wasn't on any floor plan they had access to. A voice on the phone in a chair. At 6:41 in the morning. They stood in front of the wrong entrance. He had already let me in. My name is Callie Morrow. My grandfather was Frank. He built things that held weight and lasted. He built one last thing in 11 minutes, and it lasted exactly long enough to matter. That's the story. If this one reached you somewhere specific, you already know which part. Share it with the person who has been standing outside the lobby longer than they should have been. Drop a comment and tell me about a door that was closed to you and what was on the other side when you finally got through. Subscribe to Truth Seekers. I'll see you in the next one.